What if I told you that the perfect revenge against a narcissist isn't destroying them? It's giving them exactly what they want. What if the cruelest thing you could do to someone obsessed with their own perfection is to make them truly perfect? This is the story of Olivia Kane and her narcissistic ex-husband, Adrian Blackwood. Adrian spent 10 years making Olivia believe she was worthless, crazy, and lucky that someone like him would even tolerate her existence. But Olivia wasn't crazy. She was calculating. And she spent 3 years planning a revenge so subtle, so psychologically devastating, that by the time Adrian realized what was happening, he was already trapped in a prison of his own making. Before we dive into this tale of narcissistic abuse and the most perfectly executed revenge you've ever heard, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Because this story, it's going to teach you something important about narcissists that most people never understand. The best way to destroy a narcissist isn't to tear down their false image. It's to perfect it until they can no longer live up to their own illusion. Olivia Kane understood this better than anyone, and she was about to prove it. Olivia Kane met Adrian Blackwood when she was 23 and he was 31. She was a junior architect at a prestigious firm in Manhattan, talented but unsure of herself. He was a successful investment banker, charming, confident, and devastatingly handsome. Adrian pursued Olivia with the intensity of someone who'd found exactly what he was looking for. He showered her with attention, expensive gifts, and constant reassurance that she was special, different from other women, the one person who truly understood him. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, they were married in a wedding that cost more than most people's houses. Olivia thought she'd found her fairy tale ending. The change was so gradual that Olivia didn't notice it at first. Adrian started making small comments about her appearance. "Are you sure you want to wear that? It's a bit unflattering." He questioned her work decisions. "That design seems a bit basic, don't you think? I'm just trying to help you improve." He isolated her from friends with subtle suggestions. "Sarah seems jealous of what we have. Maybe you should give her some space." He controlled their finances, insisting it was more efficient if he managed everything since he understood money better. Within 2 years of marriage, Olivia had been systematically broken down. Adrian criticized everything: her cooking, her intelligence, her career, her family, her body. But he always framed it as concern, as help, as love. "I'm only saying this because I care about you. You're too sensitive. It was just a joke. You're lucky I'm patient enough to deal with your issues. No one else would put up with you like I do." The worst part wasn't the criticism. It was how Adrian would then turn around and play the perfect husband in public. He posted about her on social media, "My beautiful wife," with heart emojis. He bought her jewelry on their anniversary. He told their friends how much he loved her. And when Olivia tried to talk about how he treated her in private, Adrian would look at her with such genuine confusion that she'd begin to doubt her own reality. "I never said that. You're remembering wrong. You're being overly emotional again. I think you might need therapy. You're imagining problems that don't exist." This is called gaslighting, and Adrian was a master at it. By their 5th anniversary, Olivia was a shadow of the confident young architect she'd once been. She'd quit her job because Adrian convinced her she wasn't good enough. She'd stopped seeing her friends because Adrian had convinced her they didn't really care about her. She believed she was worthless, broken, and impossibly lucky that Adrian stayed with her despite her flaws. But here's what Adrian didn't know about Olivia. Beneath the broken exterior he'd created, she was documenting everything. Every insult, every manipulation, every moment of abuse. Not for evidence, not for divorce court, for something much more devastating. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning when Olivia was 31 years old. She'd been married to Adrian for 8 years, and she'd finally worked up the courage to suggest they try couples therapy. Adrian's response was swift and brutal. "Therapy? You mean you need therapy? I'm not the one with problems, Olivia. I'm successful, well-liked, respected. You're the one who can't handle a normal marriage. You're the one who's too weak, too stupid, too broken to be a proper wife." He went on for 20 minutes, listing every flaw, every failure, Every reason why Olivia was lucky he tolerated her. And then he left for work, kissing her on the forehead on his way out the door, as if nothing had happened. Olivia stood in their expensive apartment, surrounded by the luxury prison Adrian had built for her, and something inside her finally snapped, not in a breakdown kind of way, in a breakthrough kind of way. She looked around at her life and realized something crucial. Adrian needed her to be broken. Her worthlessness was essential to his sense of superiority. Her weakness made him feel strong. Her dependence proved he was important, and that's when Olivia understood exactly how to destroy him. She started researching narcissistic personality disorder obsessively. She read every book, every study, every article about how narcissists think, what they need, what they fear most, and what she learned changed everything. Narcissists don't have a strong sense of self. They construct an elaborate false image of perfection and constantly need validation from others to maintain it. They're terrified of being exposed as imperfect, average, or flawed. They need people around them who reflect their superiority back at them. They need victims who make them feel powerful. They need an audience who believes in their perfection. Olivia realized that Adrian had turned her into his perfect mirror, someone who reflected back his false image of greatness by being small, weak, and grateful for his attention. So Olivia decided to become a different kind of mirror, one that would reflect Adrian's image back at him with such perfect clarity that he'd eventually shatter against his own reflection. Over the next 3 years, Olivia executed the most subtle psychological manipulation campaign ever conceived, not to destroy Adrian's false image, but to perfect it beyond his ability to maintain it. She was going to make Adrian Blackwood the most successful, admired, perfect version of himself possible. And in doing so, she was going to create a standard of perfection that would eventually destroy him from the inside out. Olivia's transformation began so subtly that Adrian didn't even notice it was happening. She started by becoming exactly what he'd always claimed he wanted: the perfect wife. She went back to the gym and got in the best shape of her life. Not for him, but because she needed the physical strength for what was coming. When Adrian commented on her improved appearance, she credited him. "You were right about me needing to take better care of myself. Thank you for pushing me." She started therapy, but not to heal from his abuse, to learn even more sophisticated psychological techniques. When Adrian said, "See, I told you that you needed help," she agreed. "You were right. You're always right. I don't know what I'd do without your guidance." But here's where Olivia's plan became brilliant. She started using her architecture background to redesign their entire life around Adrian's narcissistic image. She documented everything he did on social media, creating an online persona for him that was even more impressive than reality. She threw networking parties where Adrian was always the center of attention. She introduced him to influential people who could advance his career. She made suggestions for his work that he could present as his own ideas. Adrian's career exploded. Within a year, he'd been promoted twice. Within 2 years, he was being profiled in business magazines as one of the city's most successful young executives. Everyone wanted to be his friend, be in his network, be associated with his success. And Olivia was right there beside him, the perfect, supportive wife. Always in the background, always making him look good, always telling everyone how brilliant, how talented, how exceptional he was. Adrian ate it up. He thought Olivia had finally understood her place, finally recognized his superiority, finally become the wife he deserved. He became even more grandiose, even more confident, even more convinced of his own perfection. But here's what Adrian didn't realize. Olivia was building a trap made entirely of his own ego. With every success, every accolade, every moment of praise, she was raising the bar for what Adrian Blackwood was supposed to be. She created a public image of Adrian that was so perfect, so successful, so flawless that no real human being could possibly maintain it. And Adrian, desperate for validation, desperate to believe in his own superiority, threw himself into becoming this impossible image. He worked 18-hour days to maintain his success. He spent everything he earned on maintaining the appearance of wealth. He alienated friends and colleagues with his arrogance. But Olivia always smoothed things over, always made excuses, always protected his reputation. Olivia was creating a version of Adrian Blackwood that was so elevated, so admired, so perfect that the real Adrian could never live up to it. She was building him a pedestal so high that the eventual fall would be catastrophic, and all the while, she was documenting everything. Every lie Adrian told to maintain his image, every time he took credit for someone else's work, every moment when the mask slipped, and the insecure, average man beneath was visible. But Olivia's masterpiece wasn't just about destroying Adrian's career or reputation. That would be too simple, too external. She was going to destroy something much more fundamental: his ability to believe in his own false self. She was going to make Adrian Blackwood realize that he was exactly what he'd always accused her of being: ordinary, flawed, and desperately pretending to be something more. 3 years into her plan, Olivia was ready to execute the final phase. Adrian was at the peak of his success. Senior vice president at his firm, regular media appearances, invitations to exclusive events, a social media following in the hundreds of thousands. Everyone saw Adrian Blackwood as the perfect package. Brilliant, successful, happily married, living the dream. His entire identity was built on this image, and maintaining it had become his full-time obsession. But Olivia had engineered a situation where Adrian's perfect image required constant, unsustainable effort. He had to be the smartest person in every room. He had to be the most successful. He had to be flawless. The trap was simple. Olivia had created a version of Adrian that needed to be perfect all the time, while simultaneously ensuring that he was actually more dependent, more insecure, and more fragile than ever before. Here's how she did it. Phase 1. Career sabotage. Olivia had been secretly feeding Adrian ideas for his work, brilliant strategies that impressed his bosses and colleagues. But she'd been doing it so gradually that Adrian thought they were his own ideas. Over 3 years, Adrian had become dependent on Olivia's intelligence while believing he was the genius. Now, Olivia simply stopped helping. Suddenly, Adrian's brilliant ideas dried up. His innovative strategies stopped working. The magic that had defined his career for 3 years vanished overnight. His bosses started questioning his judgment. His colleagues began to wonder if Adrian had ever been as brilliant as they thought. Adrian panicked. He worked harder, put in more hours, tried desperately to recreate the success he'd had. But without Olivia's guidance, he was just an average banker with an inflated ego. The gap between his reputation and his ability became impossible to hide. Phase 2. Social isolation. For 3 years, Olivia had been managing Adrian's relationships. She smoothed over his arrogant behavior, made excuses for his rudeness, maintained friendships that Adrian was too narcissistic to nurture himself. Now, Olivia stopped running interference. When Adrian insulted someone at a party, Olivia didn't smooth it over. When he took credit for someone else's work, she didn't make excuses. When his arrogance alienated colleagues, she didn't reach out to repair the relationship. Within months, Adrian's carefully curated social circle began to crumble. People stopped returning his calls. Invitations dried up. The networking events that had been so crucial to his image disappeared. Adrian couldn't understand what was happening. He was still the same brilliant, charismatic person he'd always been, wasn't he? Why was everyone suddenly turning on him? Phase 3. Financial collapse. Adrian had been spending enormous amounts of money to maintain his image. Expensive clothes, luxury cars, exclusive memberships. Olivia had been quietly managing their finances, using her architecture income. She'd gone back to work secretly, to cover the gap between Adrian's spending and their actual means. Now, Olivia stopped covering for him. Bills started coming due. Credit card companies called. The lease on his luxury car couldn't be renewed. Adrian discovered that he'd been living far beyond his means for years, and only Olivia's secret financial support had prevented collapse. But Adrian couldn't admit he needed Olivia's help. That would contradict everything he'd built his identity on. So he tried to handle it himself, making increasingly desperate financial decisions that only made things worse. Within 6 months of Olivia withdrawing her support, Adrian Blackwood began to fall apart. The perfect image he'd spent years constructing started to crack in ways he couldn't control or repair. At work, Adrian was struggling. Without Olivia's ideas, his performance was mediocre at best. He started making mistakes, missing deadlines, losing clients. His bosses, who'd been grooming him for partnership, began to reconsider their investment in his career. Adrian responded the only way a narcissist knows how, by becoming more aggressive, more arrogant, more insistent on his own brilliance. He blamed others for his failures. He took credit for others' successes more blatantly than ever. He made scenes when he didn't get his way. The more Adrian's actual performance declined, the more grandiose his claims about himself became. It was textbook narcissistic behavior. When reality doesn't match the false self, a narcissist doesn't adjust their self-image. They deny reality. But there's only so long you can deny reality when everyone around you can see the truth. People started talking. Colleagues who'd once admired Adrian now whispered about his incompetence. Friends who'd envied his lifestyle started noticing the cracks. Social media followers began to see through the carefully curated image. The more people questioned him, the more desperately Adrian tried to prove his superiority. He posted even more aggressively about his success. He bragged louder about his achievements. He put down others more viciously to make himself seem elevated by comparison. Adrian was engaging in what psychologists call narcissistic collapse, when the gap between a narcissist's false self and their actual self becomes so wide that they can no longer maintain the illusion. They become more erratic, more aggressive, more desperate. And Olivia watched it all happen with the calm detachment of someone who'd engineered every step. The breaking point came at Adrian's company holiday party, 8 months after Olivia had begun withdrawing her support. Adrian had been clinging desperately to his image of success, despite mounting evidence that he was failing. Adrian got drunk, something he never did in public, because it contradicted his perfect image. And when he was drunk, all his carefully maintained masks fell away. He started bragging loudly about a major deal he'd supposedly closed, a deal that everyone at the party knew had actually been closed by a junior colleague. When someone gently tried to correct him, Adrian exploded. "I'm Adrian Blackwood. I made this company millions. You're all here because of me. You should be grateful I even acknowledge your existence." The room went silent. Everyone stared at this man they'd admired, watching him reveal the insecure, desperate, average person he'd always been beneath the elaborate facade. And in that moment, Adrian looked across the room and saw his reflection in a mirror. He saw what everyone else was seeing: a drunk, arrogant, failed man having a public meltdown at a Christmas party. For the first time in his life, Adrian Blackwood saw himself as he truly was. Not the brilliant, successful, superior being he'd convinced himself he was. Just a man. An average, flawed, scared man who'd spent his entire adult life pretending to be something more. The narcissistic false self shattered like glass. Adrian didn't go home after the party. He walked the city streets for hours, his mind reeling from what had happened, from what he'd revealed, from what he'd finally seen about himself. When he finally came home at 4 a.m., he found Olivia awake, sitting in the dark living room, waiting for him. "I destroyed myself tonight," Adrian said quietly. "I don't understand how this happened. I was perfect. I was successful. I was everything." Olivia looked at her husband, this man who'd spent 10 years systematically destroying her sense of self, and smiled. "You want to know how this happened, Adrian? Let me tell you." And then Olivia told him everything. She explained how she'd researched narcissistic personality disorder for 3 years, how she'd rebuilt him into an impossible version of himself that no real person could sustain. How every success he'd had was built on her ideas, her support, her management of his life. "I made you perfect, Adrian. I gave you everything you claimed to be, and then I let you try to maintain it on your own, because I knew you couldn't. Because without someone to prop up your false image, you're just ordinary. For 10 years, you made me believe I was worthless, crazy, broken. You gaslighted me, controlled me, isolated me, and destroyed my confidence. You needed me to be small so you could feel big. You needed me to be weak so you could feel strong. So I made you big, Adrian. I made you so big, so successful, so perfect that you couldn't sustain it. I built you a reputation you couldn't live up to. I created expectations you couldn't meet. I gave you exactly what you claimed to be, knowing that you'd eventually collapse under the weight of your own lies." Adrian stared at her, his face cycling through emotions. disbelief, horror, rage, and finally, understanding. "You destroyed me," he whispered. "No," Olivia corrected. "You destroyed yourself. I just gave you the opportunity." Adrian sat in silence for a long time, processing what Olivia had revealed. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller, more real than Olivia had ever heard it. "You're right," he said quietly, "about all of it." Olivia had prepared for many reactions: rage, denial, gaslighting, blame shifting. This wasn't one of them. "I knew," Adrian continued, not consciously maybe, but somewhere deep down, "I always knew I wasn't the person I pretended to be. That's why I needed you to be broken. If you were worthless, then even an average man like me could feel superior. If you were small, I could feel big without actually having to be big." He looked at Olivia with eyes that were, for the first time in their relationship, actually seeing her. "The worst part is, I saw how brilliant you actually were. Your architectural designs, your intelligence, your emotional strength. I saw it all and it terrified me. Because if you realized how exceptional you were, you'd realize how ordinary I was. So I spent 10 years trying to crush you into nothing so I wouldn't have to face what I really was. And you spent 3 years forcing me to face it anyway." Olivia had expected satisfaction in this moment. She'd imagined feeling victorious, vindicated, powerful. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Pity. Because here's what Olivia realized as she looked at the broken man in front of her. Her revenge had been perfect. Too perfect. She'd given Adrian exactly what he deserved. A complete destruction of his false self. A forced confrontation with his own ordinariness. But in doing so, she'd spent 3 years of her life obsessed with Adrian's destruction. 3 years she could have spent healing, rebuilding her career, finding happiness. 3 years she'd given to a man who'd already taken 10 years from her. She'd won the game. But had she won anything that actually mattered? Chapter 9. The real twist. "There's something else you should know," Adrian said quietly. "I've known about your plan for 6 months." Olivia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "I found your research on narcissistic personality disorder," Adrian explained. "Your notes about psychological manipulation. Your documents tracking every step of my rise to success. I realized what you were doing about 6 months ago." "That's impossible," Olivia said. "You couldn't have known. Your collapse, your failure, that was all real." "It was," Adrian agreed, "but it wasn't accidental. Once I understood what you were doing, I could have stopped it. I could have fired you from the position of puppet master, but I didn't." "Why not?" Olivia whispered. "Because I needed it," Adrian said simply. "I needed someone to destroy the false self I'd built, because I couldn't do it myself. Narcissists can't self-reflect, Olivia. We can't see our own flaws, can't admit our own ordinariness. We need external forces to shatter our illusions. You gave me the greatest gift possible. You forced me to see myself as I really am. Yes, it's been devastating. Yes, I've lost everything. But for the first time in my life, I'm actually real. I'm not pretending, not performing, not desperately trying to prove I'm special." Adrian looked at Olivia with something that might have been gratitude. "You spent 3 years planning my destruction, but I spent 6 months allowing it to happen, because somewhere deep down, I knew I needed to be destroyed to ever have a chance at becoming an actual person. So the question is, who actually won? You executed perfect revenge, but you spent years obsessed with my destruction. I lost everything, but I gained something I never had: authenticity. We're both sitting here at 4 a.m. in the ruins of our marriage, and neither of us is quite sure who the victor is." Olivia and Adrian sat in silence for a long time, processing the layers of manipulation, counter-manipulation, and unexpected self-discovery that had defined their relationship. "I divorced you 6 months ago," Olivia finally said. "Legally, I mean. I filed the papers while you were busy collapsing. I've already moved my things to a new apartment. I came back tonight just to see the final result of my plan." "I know," Adrian said. "I signed the papers. What happens now?" Olivia asked. "Now we both have to figure out who we are when we're not defined by our war with each other," Adrian replied. "You have to decide if you're going to spend the rest of your life as the woman who got revenge on her narcissistic ex, or if you're going to become something more." and I have to figure out if it's possible for someone like me to build a real identity instead of a false one." Olivia stood up to leave. At the door, she turned back to look at Adrian one last time. "I hope you figure it out," she said, and she was surprised to discover she meant it. "Not for your sake. For the sake of whoever you might hurt next if you don't." "I hope you figure it out too," Adrian responded, because the woman who spent 3 years engineering psychological warfare is just as trapped in her own patterns as I am in mine. Revenge might feel like justice, but it's really just another prison. Olivia walked out of the apartment she'd shared with Adrian for 10 years, leaving behind the ruins of his perfect image and her perfect revenge. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt empty, like someone who'd won a game only to discover the prize wasn't worth the cost of playing. 5 years later, Olivia Kane was a successful architect with her own firm. She'd gone back to therapy, real therapy this time, to heal from Adrian's abuse rather than to learn manipulation techniques. She'd reconnected with old friends, started dating again cautiously, and slowly rebuilt a sense of self that wasn't defined by either Adrian's criticism or her revenge against him. She thought about Adrian sometimes, wondered if he'd managed to build a real identity, or if he'd simply constructed a new false self. She'd heard he'd left banking, started working as a therapist specializing in narcissistic personality disorder. The irony wasn't lost on her. One day, Olivia received an email from Adrian. It was brief. "Thank you for destroying me. I've spent 5 years building something real from the ruins. I hope you've done the same. We were both prisoners of our own reflection. Mine of grandiosity, yours of revenge. I hope we've both found a way to break our mirrors." Olivia read the email several times, trying to decide how she felt about it. Was Adrian being genuine, or was this another manipulation? Had he actually changed, or was he performing a new role as the reformed narcissist? And then she realized it didn't matter. Adrian's journey was his own now. What mattered was her own reflection, not the one Adrian had tried to create by breaking her down, and not the one she'd created by building him up just to watch him fall. Olivia deleted the email and went back to designing buildings. Because that's who she really was. Someone who built things, not someone who destroyed them. The perfect mirror had finally shown both of them the truth. Revenge might shatter someone else's reflection, but it can't create your own. Only you can do that, and it's much harder than destroying someone else's false image. So what do you think? Was Olivia's revenge justified, or did she become just as toxic as Adrian in pursuing it? Did Adrian genuinely change, or is he still playing a role? And most importantly, can someone who's been abused by a narcissist ever truly get revenge without becoming trapped by their own need for vindication? These are questions without easy answers, and I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you've dealt with a narcissistic ex, or know someone who has, this story probably hit differently for you. The psychology of narcissistic abuse and revenge is complex, fascinating, and unfortunately all too common. If this story made you think, made you reflect on your own experiences, or taught you something about narcissistic relationships, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. And remember, the best revenge against someone who tried to make you feel small isn't making them feel small in return. It's becoming so genuinely, authentically large that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. Sometimes the perfect mirror isn't the one that reflects someone else's flaws. It's the one that shows you your own strength. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay strong, stay authentic, and never let anyone convince you that you're less than you are.